We probably needed more than everybody else here.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Both roofers.
I was worried about that.
Yesterday, they added chairs.
Yeah, you can get
So we figured we'd sit up front now, just in case.
Just in case. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's the thing.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, it's good to see you here on a Saturday morning. Hopefully everybody is rested and you've had your coffee or you're having your coffee or whatever. It's been good to be here the last few days. My name is Darren Williamson. Just for those of you that are new to the class today, we've been working through the classic passage on marriage from Ephesians chapter 5. And kind of slowly making our way through it. The first day we talked about the whole introductory issue of where this passage fits into Ephesians, how it fits into household codes, and then we got into the whole Paul's exhortation to wives, which can be summed up very simply: submit to your husbands, as the church submits to Christ, so wives are to submit to their husbands. Then we worked yesterday on the second section, which is longer, and as I said, it's kind of my default, my comfort zone is to talk to guys, right? That's what I do more than speaking to women. But the long section there, where men are supposed to emulate Christ. So wives are supposed to emulate the church. Husbands are supposed to emulate Christ in the way that he gave himself up self-sacrificially for the church, to cleanse her, make her whole, all those kinds of good things, cherishes her, nourishes her. So this is the model for the Christian husband. And so we talked about what that means yesterday, and then we got into some specific guidance as to what that looks like. Today, we are going to talk about just the final verse 33. I think we need to.
I'm sorry, I don't know. I have Ray coming over.
Oh, okay.
It like disappeared.
Something happened. Okay.
I'm so sorry.
It's all right. Today we're going to talk about verse 33, which is just that short little section where Paul is summing up things by saying this: however, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. So we'll just dwell and meditate a little bit on this one verse today. Before we get into that, though, I wanted to just mention a few resources that can be helpful for you. This is a workshop, so it's good to go home with some ideas of the stuff that you might use. So when it comes to the issue of complementarianism and egalitarianism, the classic book on that is by Wayne Grudem and John Piper, called Recovering Biblical Manhood and Womanhood. Okay, it came out like 30 years ago, but it's still kind of the classic. They republished it, Recovering Biblical Manhood and Womanhood, okay, by Grudem and Piper. Very helpful, but it's a collection of essays, exegetical essays, sociological essays, kind of big picture essays, and some of those essays I would, say I agree with that 100%. Others I would say, I'm not sure I'm on the same page. But every essay in that book is within the complementarian point of view. Okay, they all believe that God has assigned to men leadership in the home and in the church. Women are equal with men, but we have different roles. But then how that works out, there may be some differences that come out. So all of them are in that zone. Okay, and so I could recommend that book. Within our fellowship, a very good book, still is very healthy, is Everett Ferguson's book on women in the church. And that's a very small little book, but don't let the size fool you. It's dense, and that's the way Everett Ferguson, he's a great scholar. He doesn't waste words, right? He's very dense and does kind of clarify, this is the biblical, historical, New Testament teachings of male leadership and so forth. So Everett Ferguson's little book, Women in the Church, very helpful. Also, I mentioned the other day the book 101 Ways to Respect Your Husband. Right. I think I've just got here. It's a thin book here. It's all about, it's kind of from the same woman who wrote the book, The Respect Dare. So it's a book, and this is just kind of practical ideas, 101 Ways to Respect Your Husband by Nina Rosner. Might be helpful as well. Okay, one of the things that I love about Wayne Grudem, who is a major theologian, he's written a lot of stuff, he's a very strong evangelical theologian down at Phoenix Seminary, is that he is probably the prominent voice in terms of defending the historic Christian teaching about male leadership in the church and in the home, okay? Because he really believes that there's a lot at stake if we get this wrong, okay? And he is not just a scholar who writes for scholars. He does that, but he also writes for people in the pew. And one of the things that's fascinating about his story is, because we talked about yesterday about loving your wife and what that actually looks like. So here's a scholar, he's at the top of his game. He teaches at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School in Chicago. He's got this huge office, massive library. He's at the head of his field. But his wife has medical problems. She's got this issue, I can't remember what exactly it is, but the weather in Chicago evidently is kind of cold and not so good for people with whatever problem she had. And he started to notice that every time they would vacation in Arizona, she wouldn't have any of the symptoms of the problem that she had up in Illinois. And so, out of love for his wife, he moved to Phoenix, Arizona. And when he tells the story, he says, when I went to the library of this little seminary in Phoenix that I went to teach at, the library that they had was smaller than my personal library. But he did that for his wife. That's a concrete way that he loved his wife. It's not just an idea. He did that for his wife. And God has blessed that seminary. It's actually grown. He's kind of become, it's a hub now of things. So anyway, I think that's a great example of someone who's actually living it out. And as we talked about yesterday, a lot of the egalitarians have tried to make the argument that if you advocate for male headship in marriage, it leads to domestic violence and that kind of thing. And the book that I pointed out yesterday that totally puts the lie to that is Scott Wilcox, The Soft Patriarchs. And the research has shown, no, if you're a biblical male following the biblical guidance and you're a churchgoer, right? Not just a nominal Protestant male, but a church-going guy, satisfaction in marriage way higher. You're the least likely person to be a domestic violence person. But if you're a nominal Protestant guy who's heard a little bit about, yeah, I'm the head, wife's supposed to submit, he's more likely to abuse. Okay. So the big takeaway yesterday, and I hope everybody heard it loud and clear, and for those of you that are new, is we have to teach on this. You have to teach boys how to be men, how to be godly men. You have to teach current husbands who've been married for a few years, and people that have been married 20 years and 30 years and even 50 years. You still need that instruction in what it looks like to be a godly man and a godly husband. And so we cannot just believe this doctrine. We must teach it. Okay? We've got to teach it. We believe and we teach. All right, so that's enough of that of kind of summary. Does anybody anybody that was here yesterday have a takeaway from yesterday that you want to add? Just kind of maybe your takeaway from yesterday that you think the newcomer should know about this before we get back in. Nothing.
It might be obvious, but when it comes to the wife and submission, you can, even though she's compared to the church and the husband's compared to Christ, in one sense, no one, Jesus, the Christ deity, he has shown the example of both ultimate submission to God and ultimate love of God for mankind. And so he's kind of a role model for both.
Yes.
I don't know anybody that submitted more to God than Christ.
Right. And as you pointed out yesterday, Philippians 2, it's very clear that Christ, though he was in nature and equality with God. He did not count that equality something to be grasped and empty himself and so forth. So it's not like he diminished himself by doing that. It was for a greater purpose. Okay. Well, let's pick up and talk about the rest of it. Let's read the whole thing, and then we'll zero in on verse 33. Look carefully then how you walk, the section there about walking by the Spirit, submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. It sets the tone for the whole section. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle, or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself, for no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. Quote, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church. Verse 33, however, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, we come before you this morning, and we want to continue our study of this very important passage. Illuminate our minds and hearts. Shine the light of your truth into the places in our marriages that illumination is needed, where there maybe is some change that needs to happen. Help us, Lord, who teach others, to find ways that we can communicate your truth about marriage to young married families specifically, and young men and young women. I pray for the older women in this class, that they will find ways, that you will open opportunities for them to teach the younger women these truths around coffee or in the nursery or wherever they find. Just help them, Lord, to be able to convey your truth to young women who need to hear this message as well. And help us all to submit to your will. To Christ's holy name that I pray. Amen. All right, so start off, go to the next slide if you will. The name of this section is Reciprocal Rapport, which I was trying to, have some alliteration, so that's why I came up with this one. The idea is reciprocity within marriage. There is a relationship. It's like this. It's not a one-way street. Okay, it's both are doing things. And this verse 33, is powerful because it sums up the entire section. And Egerich wrote a book which became kind of a phenomenon about 20 years ago and is still very popular. And he builds on this idea of love and respect. How many of you are familiar with Egerich's stuff? Okay, all right, good. So some powerful, good material in there. And he basically says, love is what every woman desires, and respect is what every man needs. And that's why there's a difference here. So I'm not necessarily saying, hey, go do this book, but I mean, it did bring out some really good concepts, and Melody and I benefited a lot from it. In fact, every once in a while, we still kind of joke about, he uses phrases like, you're stepping on my air hose. You remember that?
Yeah.
Okay. I was like, hey, you're stepping on my air hose. Oh, she knows what that means, right? Because it's some kind of you're choking me out somehow by behavior and vice versa, right? I do. But what was for the woman? It was is that the same? Is it the woman, the air hose you can step on?
There's a pink and blue. There's the hose.
Oh, okay.
One was pink and one was blue.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. But the point I want to just make here is that in our world today, it has to be just reiterated, and we have to be reminded, because the entire flow of our feminist culture is downplaying the differences. And if you're saying all those differences exist, they don't really mean much. You need to remember, the Bible teaches that men and women are different. Okay, we are not the same. And I was reading an article by Elizabeth Elliot. Remember, everybody know who she is? She's kind of the famous. Her husband was a martyr from South America, whatever. And she wrote a book about "Let Me Be a Woman." Right, was the name of the book. But in this Recovering Biblical Manhood of Woman. And she's got a short little essay. And she talks about how we have to say things today that cultures in the past have not had to say. They just knew it was true, is that men and women are different. Okay? Everybody's always known that. And she said, we worked in a Stone Age culture. They didn't even talk about it. Everybody knew. The women do this, the men do that. It's not a big fight. This is the way the society works, and it works well. Okay. There is this difference but equality that the Bible affirms and that is important to embrace. And so I thought I would just mention this briefly. And the fact that the Bible gives different instruction to men and women just reinforces that concept, right? It's implied in the different instruction. Wives this, men this, older men this, younger men this. I mean, there is a gender-specific kind of thing that the instruction, a lot of the moral instruction is given that helps communicate this. So here are a few things to keep in mind when it comes to differences that come out with this idea of different instructions. Physically different, okay? Body size, capabilities, function in society, okay? Anybody know what the average height for a man is? Close. 5'9". What's the average height for a woman? 5'4". Okay, good. Should I go here? Okay, average weight for a man.
200.
Unknown, 198 pounds. Average weight for a woman? A lot less than that, okay?
Wisdom at the same time.
A lot less than that. Okay, I mean, we're talking 70-something pounds less than that. Average, okay? That fact alone teaches us something about a man's role. Yesterday we talked about men need to be protectors. That's how God created men to be. And that's what a husband must be in the marriage relation. He's protecting his wife. God's physically given men more capability. There's the lung capacity, the heart size. There's all those things that now, with all the transgender stuff that's happening, the craziness there's been a lot of people pushing back and saying, listen, guys, let's talk about something that we all learned in biology class, but it's being denied today. And the fact that this really does make a difference. So men have way more upper body strength. Women only have on average 52% of the body strength of a man, upper body strength. Okay? We're not comparing bodybuilders versus video game playing guys. We're talking about, we're average. Okay, 66 women have about 66% of the lower body strength of men, and men have to be good stewards of this. Right? You have to steward this well. And if this was a men's class or men's retreat, I'd be talking about things, the way you're supposed to treat women that's different, but we'll move on. There's emotional differences between men and women. Women are more sensitive than men, okay? They are socially different. They have a much more social kind of way of relating to people. Communication, right? I mean, all the studies talk about how many words a man uses in a day versus women, right? And men don't use as many as the guys do, or as the women do, okay? So these are all differences. There's interests, there's desires. Women have different value systems. They value relationships over necessarily producing things, struggles and temptations differ. There's all these kinds of things. All right, these need to be reiterated in our culture. They're not fabrications of just a patriarchal society, whatever. Most have some kind of a biological base with how God has made us, okay, and the role that we're supposed to be playing in society and in the church. God made men and women differently, and he determines how that relationship is supposed to be, both in the church and in the home. Okay, so I guess think about some of those differences, and just the general teaching about the marriage is the husband is the head of the wife, just like Christ is the head of the church. We've already talked about that. She's supposed to submit to his leadership. It's her submitting to him, not him submitting her to him, okay, which is a huge point. And we talked about that on day one. But then the idea of headship, which is authority, but it is loving authority. It is an authority that is responsible, and he is supposed to take the lead. Can you go to the next slide, please? How about the next? There we go. That's what I'm looking for. Okay. A great illustration that I ran into a few years ago. Family Life Today did a great series called The Art of Marriage. You may have seen that. It's a ministry out of Little Rock, Arkansas, and it was very well done. In fact, we did this. It's one of those times where somebody said in a staff meeting, "Hey, I think we need to have some stuff on marriage right now." And you listen to that, because if somebody brings that up, it means they may know of something. Okay, so we decided, we looked around, looked for something that was positive. Melody and I have really benefited from Family Life Today ministry. It's a radio program. It's been going on for a long time in Arkansas. Don't agree with them all on all their theology, but on the marriage stuff, it's really solid. And they put together this DVD series called The Art of Marriage. And so we did this series. It's one of the examples I can honestly say. There was a couple that came to it from the community. Their marriage was about ready to be destroyed. The material here saved their marriage and resulted in 3 of the people in their family being baptized, including the dad, older son, and later son. A couple of these kids went off to university. I mean, this made a huge difference in a family's life, and that family's still faithful and doing good things in that church. Okay, so it's a good DVD series. But one of the images that they say, this is the way you should think about marriage. Okay? That the husband and the wife are like they're dancing a waltz. Someone has to lead, right? The guy leads, but he does it gently. She follows, and everything goes smooth. But if she tries to lead as well, you're stepping on each other's feet. You're not making it. It's not beautiful. Instead, it's a mess. It looks like, Elaine, dancing, whatever. It's like it's not pretty. You know what I'm talking about? Okay, Seinfeld reference. Okay, which bad show in a lot of ways, but anyway, that was funny. She danced, and it looked horrible, right? But this is how God's designed. The man is supposed to be leading gently. He's not, like this. He's guiding, he's directing, and she's following, and then you get this beautiful thing. Okay, what an image for marriage, right? But it has to start with just an understanding of God's ordination, and then things will flow very well. All right, now let's go back to that previous slide. All right, I'm going to go through a couple of things, and I'm going to open up for some comments. Love and respect. This reciprocal rapport, I think, is important to just remember. Obviously, equal but different. When it comes to husbands, you're told to love your wives as yourself. Again, this gets back to the idea that the husband is intricate. He's viewing his wife as an extension of himself. I mean, it's like Christ loves the church. It's his body. Husband loves his wife because it's his body. And of course, you wouldn't hate your body. So as Paul wraps this up, he refers back to the oneness that's in marriage. Okay? Some practical ways, because I told you guys on the first day of the class I wanted this to be pastoral, right? Practical. How do you do this? Okay. Finding out who she is, what her needs are, all those kinds of things, and then showing Christ-like sacrifice. Remain, keep the oneness protected, and then love her as your closest neighbor. All scholars on this passage, they point out this sounds very familiar. Leviticus 19:8, love your neighbor as yourself, right? Coming out of Leviticus. Well, she's your closest neighbor. She's the closest of all neighbors you've got. You must love her and look out for her best interest. Practical ways. Number 1, faithfulness. Number 1, absolute faithfulness. With your body, with your heart, with your eyes, with your words. She's got to know that you are 100% faithful to her. Okay? Again, if this was a men's retreat, I'd be talking about, watch your eyes, bounce your eyes, no ogling, all that kind of stuff. But I think this is a mature crowd. You understand that. Number 2, private praise. Husbands, the way you love her in a practical way is that you praise her in private. Right? You tell her how much you appreciate her. Guys, this is one of those things about the differences, right? Maybe we don't care about that so much, right? I mean, but she does. She needs to know that you appreciate her. Private praise is important. One of the things that I struggle with as a husband is that I am not a card writer. If someone sends me a card, I will often say, if you want to read it, go ahead, to mail it. I'll have her read it. I don't really care. She loves cards, though, right? She writes cards. She receives cards. She reads them. I watch her face when she reads it. She smiles, all that kind of stuff. Well, that's the difference between us. So as a husband, I need to know that about her and respond appropriately. Public praise. How about showing gratitude in public to your wife, guys? Is a way that you love her and show that you value her, speaking well of her, siding with her, avoiding criticism of her in public spaces. Again, it's something I'm still working on. I've been married 32 years, still working on this, right? Because a few years ago we had a program, something went really well. We had a kind of a final ceremony. Thank you for these people that did this. Thank you for the people who did that, whatever. And I didn't thank my wife, right? And one of our elders came up to me afterwards and said, whoa, you thanked a lot of people, but you didn't thank her, okay? And that was a good reminder, but in my defense, okay. In my defense, as I reflected on that, because of course I was thankful for her. Of course I loved her. Of course I was appreciative of all she had done to make that program successful that year. But because of our oneness, when I praise her publicly, it feels like I'm kind of doing a little bit of this. Okay? Right? So, but I still need to get over that and praise her and not feel like I'm, praising myself by praising her. So, public praise. And then also, of course, serving her needs. Find out what they are. Living with her in an understanding way. 1 Peter 3, verse 7 talks about that, right? You live with your wife in an understanding way. And I think part of that's researching her, knowing her needs, knowing what makes her happy, and then serve her in that way. All right, respect is what the woman is supposed to be giving to her husband. As I mentioned the first day, as kind of almost like a preview, a trailer to the whole series, and I kind of got ahead of myself in my notes. What's interesting is, can we go back 2 slides, please? Okay. So the word up here that kind of introduces in general the whole concept of submission within the household, submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. That's the Greek word phobos. We get the word fear from it, right? And in the Bible, fear has a kind of a large semantic range of kind of what it means. It can mean just fear, or it can mean reverence. I think here it's clearly reverence, okay? But it's the same word here. It's kind of interesting. It's almost, they call it an inclusio. You kind of start with something, you end with it, you kind of wrap it up in a bow. Right? There's fear, here there's reverence toward this whole thing, of submission within the system. And then down here, it wraps it up with that. So the ESV puts respect, but commentators like it's a little stronger than that. Now we're getting into some mystery here. What does it mean for a wife to reverence her husband? Okay. And now we're really tweaking, people might not like that language, but if that's what the Bible is saying, it certainly is not going to be just, worshiping him. I mean, there's no idols, right? We only have one God. Okay, you don't worship your husband. It's not that kind of reverence. But could it be that it's deeper than respect, because you're realizing this man that I voluntarily covenanted with, by the way. Nobody put a gun to my head and made me marry him, I don't think, in most situations. This man is God's provision for me. He is doing wonderful things in my life. Like what Christ did for the church. And I see that in him. And I really reverence him. I respect him for what he's doing, and as a value to me and a gift from God. I think that's more along the lines of where this may be going, is to look at him as God's provision for you, wives, and to treat him in that way, that respectful way. It's deeper than just, saying, hey, honey, I appreciate you mowing the grass. It looks great. Or I appreciate the fact that, that you bring home the bacon, that you support our family. All those are good things too, but it may be even deeper than that. Okay. And to explore that, what that looks like, wives. And I know at this point, there may be some who think you're thinking already, well, what about if he's not respectful? What if he's not someone who is respectful? What do I do then? And I think just taking a cue from the military might be, it's probably the best analogy, which is sometimes you salute the office, or you salute the rank, not necessarily the man. You guys have heard that concept? You might not respect the guy individually, but he has colonel bars on his shoulder or whatever, and you're a lieutenant, so whatever. You see what I'm saying? So you salute the fact that he is the husband, he's the head, even though maybe he's not living like he should be in it. I still need to show him respect because of God's ordination, and trust that God will bless you in that. In 1 Peter chapter, I probably should just read 1 Peter 3 because I keep referring to it. But I think it's very interesting. We don't have time to go through the whole thing, but in 1 Peter, he makes reference to the fact that wives are supposed to submit themselves to their husbands. Chapter 3, verse 1. Likewise, wives, submit to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, unbelieving husbands, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives, when they see your respectful and pure conduct. And then wrapping up in verse 6, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, and you are her children if you do good and do not fear anything that is frightening. It can be a very fearful and frightening thing to submit to your husband. What's going to happen if things don't go right? What's going, whatever. So overcome that and trusting that God will take care of you if you respect the rank, so to speak. Okay, but then try to work toward developing that attitude of reverence, a deeper appreciation for the role that your husband plays as your head, your protector, your provider. He is God's gift to you. I know that phrase is not used differently sometimes, but show it in a very real sense. He is God's provision for you for your marriage. All right. Comments, thoughts on that stuff before I move on? I know I threw a lot in there. Brett.
Darren, in a lot of ways, it's the relationship is so reciprocal. The mystery of the submission, like husbands are to love their wives as Christ loved the church. Wives are to respect their husbands as he is Christ, are like Christ and submit to him. In the church, everybody has to submit to Christ and submit to his authority. We're all individuals. Christ lets us make all of our own individual choices and allows us to make mistakes and whatnot, but still loves us and covers us with grace and mercy. And when we do something wrong, we ask for forgiveness, and Christ gives it to us. For the husbands, they have to really extend themselves to make that sacrifice for their wives, to like the purpose. And I thought about this when I was younger. I was like, this is unfair. Like, why do I have to lay down my life for this other person? Why should I make the sacrifice of being crucified, in essence, for my wife? But the fact of the matter is if we step back from the marriage relationship and look at Christ and the church and what that relationship is, that is so much bound up in this majestic, divine love that it fuels both parties. Christ's motivation was love for us. Our motivation for Christ is love. And then we zoom that back into the husband and wife relationship, and it's the same thing. It's like both are motivated out of this divine love that we're mimicking, and then it becomes this reciprocal relationship that goes back and forth. That's how I understand it.
Well said. And what's really interesting, especially when you contrast this with the household codes like the Greco-Roman society, is how deep the rationale here is for this.
Yeah.
You could just say, hey, you'll get along better. There won't be so much yelling in the house. Husbands, you're the head. Wife, you do what he says, and then it'll be calmer, right? You could use some just very practical rationale, but Paul doesn't go. He goes to the highest rationale of all, the highest kind of relationship, the deepest kind of thing. It says, this is what motivates us. And To me, that's one of the most striking things about this. And frankly, in other places, Colossians, he doesn't go into all this. So it's not there. It's just simple, right there. And maybe it's because he felt, well, I did that in another letter that they have access to as well. But he's just kind of repeating the gist of it in Colossians. But I just find that really amazing. Okay, what else? Yes.
I just think this was a blessing to have this class. For me, being the believer in our marriage, it takes endurance, I'll have to say that for sure. But it helps me to I've just been praying a lot about it, and it's like, God, I'm just gonna double down and just really resubmit to my husband, because there's times where I just kind of like, ugh, it's hard. But at the same time, I love that this commitment to my husband is like just my love for God. And it's like it draws me closer to God as well as my husband. So it's like it's a win-win. And I know that someday, that God will answer the prayer that I pray over my husband every day. And I know, people love to use that 1 Peter 3 with me all the time. And it's kind of that, it's just thrown at me, kind of like just stay the faith and keep the faith and everything like that. And it's easy to be said when you're in a marriage with both husband and wife believing. And I'm not discarding that at all. But for me, it just really helps me to just be reminded of what my role is right now as a wife, and it gives me joy having that purpose kind of just reignited, of what I'm here for, and it could be just for my husband, and so that's the hope that I carry with me.
Yeah, Jonathan, go ahead.
Although it's difficult for a woman to respect a husband that doesn't show proper love for her, and it's difficult for a husband to love a wife that doesn't show proper respect to him. Some people falsely assume, well, if they're not doing their part, then I don't have to do mine. But you have to look at your role and trust, like you said, in God. And you do your part, whether the other person does their part or not. And sometimes it just turns around and just builds upon each other to where both of you start doing your part.
In teaching this and in studying it, I think in all of the texts, we see for the men to Christ. We see for the women to Christ. I think we have to come to an understanding that we are married to Christ first in our marriages. We're married to Him first, and He's what holds it together. I think we lose that sometimes. I think we think that we're married to our wife, we're married to our husband. We don't necessarily see Christ as the center of our marriage first. We're married to Christ first in that union. And I think when that happens, that your marriage becomes what it's meant to be by design.
Yeah, Mark.
This discussion helps me appreciate my mom's character even more, because my father was not a believer when I was growing up. My mom became a Christian when she was 15, married my dad, lived later, and lived over 40 years a different lifestyle. My dad was a good moral man, but he was not a believer. He claimed to be an agnostic. And it took 40 years. He was eventually baptized into Christ. But this idea of what you're saying here and sharing and what some of these comments, of course, make me appreciate my mom's steadfastness and how she lived with my father and the differences and how she negotiated that in a very Christ-like way.
All right, last point, Keith, and then we'll move on.
Revolving around the mystery of this, when we look at this, some people have, emotions are that I love them or I don't love them, or, why can't I love the person that I love, which is what the world says. They twist this, they don't understand the mystery part, but they see the emotion part, and it plays on their heartstrings. Well, I love this person, I ought to marry this person, regardless of male, female, etc. The world says that. And we see that even in the other relationships that the Bible says, like who should lead the church. So ElderLink published an article about leadership in the church, and they used an example of a lady that's very smart. She's got a PhD. Well, I should be leading this. I'm better at leading than some of these men. And the Church of Christ won't let me do it. You know, playing on their emotions, their heartstrings. But we have to realize that the mystery is more than emotions. And sometimes we don't understand, but we have to go with God's word, even though our emotions play on us. And that's what we're seeing in the world about this kind of relationship, is people are using emotions to say, I can justify not doing this and have other kinds of relationships because of the emotions.
Very good point. That's kind of like a foundational principle, is that the emotions in this relationship cannot be the driver. Right? It cannot be the driver for our theology or exegesis or anything. I mean, because the heart is deceived, right? You can't trust what's there, and that's one of the enshrine or the exaltation of the self is the biggest problem we have right now in our culture. This is the truth. This is bound up in my feelings, and so I'm very glad you brought that up. That's very important. And on the whole issue of like, this is a little bit of a rabbit trail, but you brought it up. So I have heard of scholars who have counseled people about, okay, how do you move your church on women's roles down the path to more inclusion, maybe all the way to the point of elder. It's not about rational discussion of the Bible. It's about emotions. So you get people to tell stories of how they have felt neglected or put aside, tug on the heartstrings. That's the way to get in. That's extremely dangerous theology. It's very dangerous. And we've got to be people who, without denying the emotional aspect of the human person, I mean, we don't want to do that. Mind, body, soul, all that. That cannot be the driver. It has to be something else, especially in marriage. Boy, if we let emotions drive how we act in marriage, we're in big trouble. It's got to be covenant faithfulness, commitment to God, knowledge of what His expectations are for us. And that will produce good, healthy, flourishing marriages. All right, let's move on to the last point, and then we're going to have some more time for people to comment here. So can you go to like the last one more? There we go, that thing. This whole idea of protecting the marriage relationship, the more I think about marriages, and as a minister think back about marriages that have gone under and things that have happened, this idea of protecting the oneness that God has created in marriage is so critical. And in verse 33, husbands, love your wives as you love yourself, is that idea of the oneness that often when you forget the oneness that you have in marriage or you neglect it, then the marriage begins to break down. And so I just want to encourage some things to help us protect the marriage relationship. Maybe you can add some more to this. So number one is watch out, beware of worldly views of marriage. We've already kind of hit on this a little bit today in some comments and so forth. We have to watch out for the corruptions of what marriage is that are out in the cultural milieu, okay, out there in the mess that people are drinking in, whether it's media, Hollywood, social media, friends, movies, whatever it is. Okay, and I mean, it could be kind of funny every time you watch a movie. Say that's a false view of marriage. Okay, that is an ungodly way to look at this relationship. You could just kind of count it, right? And how many strikes do you get before the movie gets turned off? Because it's going to affect your mind, whether you think it will or not. It's you're soaking it up. And so beware of these things. Things like my happiness, my fulfillment, my desires, all of that kind of thing. Selfishness versus selflessness in the worldly view of marriage. He's not fulfilling my needs, whatever. She's not doing what I need for her to do, whatever. Those kinds of things. Temporary marriage, viewing it as some kind of thing that's like any other relationship, together for a while, and then if it's not working out, then get out of it. I hear a lot of people these days talking about how we've been together for so long, as if being together is the same as marriage. It's like, well, no, that's not the same. Okay. his and hers. The other day we talked about prenuptial agreements. Brother was telling me that in the Philippines, evidently a prenuptial agreement means something different. It means what?
Going and having your pictures
Yeah.
and all that stuff.
Prenuptial pictures like ahead of time. And he was sharing that someone had brought up, hey, we need to get the prenups. I go, hey, I don't think that's it. It was just about pictures. But prenuptial agreements are a ways of undermining marriage from the beginning. And I talked about the guy who came to me after church and wanted to know what I thought about it standing in the foyer of the church building. So it's always great to answer deep questions that way. But anyway, the unity, little things chip away. I noticed that even like on our credit card statements now, her charges are separate from my charges, even though it's the same account. I don't like that. I mean, it helps us know who bought the thing at Costco or whatever, but little things like that begin to chip away at the unity of marriage. Watch out for those things. And there are some that are kind of, harmless. His and hers towels, her sink, my sink, whatever in the back. But think about things like that, those ungodly potential things that could be destroying the oneness in marriage. The list can go on. All right, we must be totally soaked in the biblical view of marriage and make sure we have that and watch out for the contrary ones. I mean, now the Supreme Court in 2015 with Obergefell that basically said that gay marriage is the law of the land. You cannot outlaw it. The state cannot do that. And that's what a Supreme Court decision did, right? It did the same thing with abortion back in 73 with Roe v. Wade. They basically took it out of the hands of the states and said, no, this is a constitutional protected thing. And if you read the arguments that were made in Obergefell, Christians better sit up and wait, because basically the Supreme Court said that the Christian view of marriage is damaging. That's what it said. They're coming after our view of marriage big time. We better be ready for this. And I thought somebody was, being hypersensitive when they said that. And then I read the decision. I was like, wow, they're coming after us. So the thing that the Christian church has always taught, like that with one Supreme Court decision, is now said by the highest court in the land to be damaging to the person. Okay? They say that you can't be married if you're same sex. Okay. Now, it's possible that things like that can be reversed in our culture, but not without a lot of work. And what law does, don't ever forget, law is a teacher. People will refer to that now, and it becomes part of what's teaching our culture. Okay, so it's not just TikTok and places like that are teaching an unbiblical view. It's coming down like this as well. So we're getting kind of sandwiched. We got to watch out for this. All right, number 2, beware of third-party intrusion. This is more personal. The greatest threat to oneness in marriage is third-party intrusions. The first thing to determine when someone is having marital trouble, this is when they come to me and they say, I'm having marriage trouble. First thing I ask is there somebody else involved here? Right? Because normally that's the case. And a lot of you ministers and elders and people that work with people, there's some other thing that's getting in there between the oneness of the husband and wife, whatever that might be. Okay? The most obvious might be a friendship of the opposite sex, or just friends. But you're sharing more with her about your struggles, challenges, and then all of a sudden those conversations are like, yeah, my wife and I are struggling right now. That's like completely off. Don't even go there. Okay? Mm-hmm. That becomes an intrusion. In fact, I had a young married guy call me recently, struggling, his wife's struggling, whatever, with him. They're having some problems, and it didn't take but about a minute to find out he has a coworker that he's friends with, that they're talking a lot, and the wife is like not comfortable with that. But nothing's happening, nothing's going on. Next thing you know, I find out that she's attractive, the coworker, and she's single. And it's like, okay, I know where this is going. You have to cut this off immediately. Mm-hmm. Because your wife is picking up on something. You got to just get out of that. Okay. Most affairs don't start as affairs; they start as friendships. Okay. They kind of go like this. Okay. So I know I'm speaking to the choir here. but it's important to remember that, and as ministers, remind, especially young married couples, about this. How about parents intruding in on the oneness of marriage? The leave and cleave concept, right? For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be joined. It's a very strong language. Okay, cleaving is separation. Joining is like glue. You're being really strongly connected to your wife. Okay, the two shall become one flesh. So forth. There is a great tendency for parents to meddle in marriages in a way that's not healthy at all. Okay, and one of the things that I'm seeing these days, especially in the Northwest, is because it's so expensive to live up here, get outside, get out of the house. We're seeing a lot of young married couples have to be dependent on their parents longer. Okay, and I just feel like that's an intrusion. Okay, somehow, if you're ready to be married, you're ready to be independent. You got to do it. You got to figure out how to. Even if you're living in some trailer somewhere or whatever, you got to be independent, because otherwise, the oneness there could have problems. Everything from well-intended things like, oh, they're having trouble finding a house to rent. Oh, maybe we'll just buy a house for them and rent it to them. Sounds nice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sounds good.
Until they stop paying rent.
Until they stop paying rent, okay, it becomes a problem there. But also now you're the landlord, and you're going to be, oh, well, I don't know if you need to fix that thing, or, your husband, your son-in-law, now he didn't fix stuff like he should or whatever. I mean, just watch out for that. Parents of young marrieds, do not impede the oneness in your child's marriage. Also, children. It's a tough thing to say, but the oneness of marriage can be threatened by children. Okay? Everybody knows the story of the young married couple. They were all close and all that. Kids come along, they focus on the kids, then the kids leave after 20 years, and then they're like, who are you?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Well, fix that. Don't do that. Don't let that happen. In fact, the kids, they will leave. Right? That's the whole point. You're supposed to, like their arrows, you're supposed to go. And then you're going to still be with your spouse until death do you part. So you got to keep cultivating that relationship and make sure the kids are not kind of becoming something that's intruding there. Okay. Things, too busy, a job that's intruding and impeding the oneness in marriage. Devices can intrude and divide up the oneness that's in marriage. All kinds of things. The basic principle, though, I just want to make sure I'm communicating, is watch out for third-party things that tend to separate you from the oneness that God intends for us in marriage. Any comments on those kinds of things? Anything I'm missing there? Maybe some other intrusive things? Yes, sir.
In Shirley Glass's book, Not Just Friends, she talks about the third-party intrusions, and she has the window to the wife and then put a wall up to others outside of the marriage. And what happens is you take a brick out of the wall and you put it over in front of the window when you start talking to somebody else, and eventually what you do is you've walled off your spouse, and you have a window over here. So I just thought that was a great analogy.
So glass, not just friends?
Shirley Glass, Not Just Friends. It's very, I'll say medicinal. It's stats and stuff like that. So.
All right, good. Go ahead.
My daughter asked me to arrange be the event planner on their marriage. And I told her I was not going to be that kind of mother of the bride or mother-in-law that said this, such and so. It had to be all them. And it ended up that we had a conversation with my soon-to-be son-in-law, and he had veto power. And he only vetoed like 2 things. But since then, they've been married 9 years now, but I still get phone calls, Mom, what do you think? And I'll say, I suggest. Not, you should do this, but I suggest. And it's entirely up to her and him, and I have to stay out of whatever the decision they make. Because your children will come to you and say, Mom, what do you think? And it may not be anything about their marriage, but what do you think about this change in our diet? Or something like that. Or what did you and Dad do when? Right. But we have to there's a very grayish area where your kids will come to you, but you want to keep them independent.
Right, yeah. Yeah, first time my married daughter calls me and asks me how to fix a thing or whatever, I want to ask her, well, did you talk to your husband yet about that, right? I don't want, she hasn't called me yet. It's been a year, so I guess maybe she's not going to. But, the idea is, okay, she needs to be connected to her husband on these kinds of things, not looking to me. And then if, let's say, they together want to ask my advice, that's fine. But it needs to not be an intrusion. Yeah, Brianna?
Something that John and I talked about early on was we needed to have people that were neutral. So we were kind of blessed. So my mother-in-law got married in 2019 to his stepfather. So they were we got married in 2020. And so that was a blessing that when we officially told like, hey, we were thinking about getting married, they were like, can we just chat each week and just, talk to you guys? So they were still newlyweds, but they still had 2 separate marriages, widower, that they could pull from, and new things they were learning, so it was nice to have that call, but I was like, we need people that we can talk to that are going to be neutral. I was like, my family's going to take my side no matter what, vice versa. So we chose 3 couples. One couple could be our parents, another couple a little bit older than us, and the ones that are around our age. And we had an agreement that if something came up, which we knew it probably would, where it's like, if we cannot agree on something or we're struggling with something, we go to these couples. Like, yes, we're talking to your moms that each week, but certain things we go to these couples. And there were plenty of times that they were like, okay, I know how you are, Brianna. This is probably what you're doing. Maybe you guys, we were always together. But it was nice to have that. And there was one point where we were sitting down with a couple because we were just, before marriage, a lot of craziness going on. And a wise man said, Brianna, you have to love God more than John. John, you have to love Brianna more than God. And if Brianna makes a decision that's putting God over you, you cannot get mad at her. Brianna, if John chooses God in the situation over you, you cannot get mad at him for doing that. And it just opened it where it's like, yes, because he's like, there's going to be times where you're, early on, it's just that, but you still have to put God first and respect your spouse for doing that. And that was just
great.
Amazing.
Great point. All right, we need to wrap this up. So, I guess the thing that's on my heart as I've been praying for this class and for you all, just submission, wives especially, submit to your husbands as the Lord. Preachers, male teachers can teach God's will for that, help us understand it. But really, it's the older Christian women who have to train the younger women how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
That's Titus 2.
Mm-hmm.
Older women, Titus is told to teach the older women, or tell the older women, instruct the older women, to train the younger women in how to be submissive to their husband, how to work at home, all that kind of thing. And so, older women, are you doing that? Are you helping the younger women? Because I guarantee they don't know. They're brought up in a culture that doesn't know anything about this. Okay, and so they need help, right? And same thing with guys. Men, you've got to train men to be men. Okay, that's just the way it is. Yes, sir.
Question, being someone who's teaching this, talking about this, and having daughters that are growing up and marrying men, how's those conversations gone with your daughters and with young men that are courting your daughters? I mean, not to get too personal, but
personal, but I'll do it. I have 6 daughters, so
yeah.
okay, I'm going to punt that question. But Voddie Baucham wrote a very interesting book. You ever read Voddie Baucham?
Yes.
Okay. He wrote a book. It's one of his lesser-known books. It's called "What He Must Be If He Wants to Marry My Daughter."
Yeah.
And it's a fascinating book. And he has a chapter on what if you look around and there are no young men who are doing it right, and who are they supposed to be? You know what his answer is? Create them. Bring them, teach them, mentor them for your daughters. It's going to be interesting. Okay. Anyway, so I don't know. Last point, and then we better wrap it up.
So I've been in the church for decades. And I know that these workshops, they have classes for women on women. I've never seen a formal class in any church of Christ I've attended that the older women are teaching the younger women. Now, is that a failing in the church, or am I looking at it the wrong way?
Well, we've seen ladies' classes from time to time. I mean, I don't know if you have them at your church, but a lot of times those lady classes aren't talking about this stuff.
Yeah, that's my point.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that it is an area that, in fact, it's ironic in a time when there's a clamoring for women to be teaching mixed assembly. It's like, I'll start with the women because you're actually commanded to do that over women. That would be the best place to go, and I think we need to lean into that, right? And so I think that's a great idea, and that's why I want to leave with kind of an exhortation: older women, find ways to be teaching the younger women, and because the way that this doctrine of submission finds its way into the crevices of the everyday life, I can't teach that. An older woman can come alongside a younger woman and help her with that in a way that I can't. I'm a man, right? And go through the fears and the struggles, and plus, yeah. So I think that's where the older women need to step in. So, okay, let me pray and then we'll be done. Father in heaven, thank you for this 3 days to work through this text. Thank you for what you taught me, my preparation, and hopefully others as we've worked through this. May you help us, Lord. We need your strength. We're weak, and in many ways, we are not what you want us to be. But Lord, as we look at the model of your church and the model of Christ, may we be better husbands and wives. May our households be shining examples to a broken and confused and lost world about what marriage, this beautiful mystery, is supposed to be like. Help us, Lord, in our failings, and lift us up and strengthen us. Help our churches to be more faithful. Help us to find ways to teach young men. Help us to find ways to teach young ladies what your will is in marriage. It's in Christ's name I pray. Amen.
We have a marriage workshop here in August
Oh,
with
yes.
Trey and Lee Morgan.
Good.